Good afternoon. The Committee of the Whole is back in order. We're on page 62. Office of Imagatlahi Guahan. Any comments?
Just like to amend part 2 to be only year 2017.
Okay. No objection. That's just correcting the biennial provisions. Anything else in that chapter? No objections? Thank you. Subsection B, Commission on Decolonization. No objection?
No objection.
Thank you. Subsection C, Guam Ancestral Lands Commission.
No objection.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
No questions.
I know you were kind of on a roll, but the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission, does that include the properties for that we have been awarding them for government lands in lieu of some kind of payment? Or is this just for their expenses of operation?
This is just operations.
Okay, thank you.
No objection? Subsection D, Guam Office of Veterans Affairs. Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I just want to recognize that or highlight that, in fact, the allocation that was provided in Public Law 33-185, based on the 9+3 allocation and the use of the transfer authority of the Chief Executive, apparently he has already transferred, if I'm not mistaken, about $17,000 into the Guam Veterans Affairs Office to address certain vendors and obligations of that particular entity. So just for future reference, as we take a look and continue to support our veteran community, that this is particularly one area that we may need to revisit and see if we can adjust it upwards so that it can accommodate the actual requirements for our veteran community. Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Nelson.
Just a question, Mr. Chair. So this does not include the funding, as the previous speaker stated, for the Public Law 33-135? This appropriation?
No.
Which is the amount of $75,000?
I'm sorry, I don't. It's our good colleague to the rear of me from Manila, who provided that $75,000 for the repair of the water system, the leaks there in the last fiscal year's
that was
budget.
that one-time need for repair of the office.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. E, BBMR. No objection. Thank you. F, Civil Service Commission. Any? Department of Administration, G. Senator Morrison, then Senator Uggan.
Mr. Chair.
Please.
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chair, under, on page 77, item 11, Office of Technology, to change, actually page 78, to change in line 3, the word may to shall.
Okay. Can we just, let's start at the beginning and work our way through, but I will.
I thought you were adopting the whole chapter, Mr. Chair. So.
No, this one is, this one's longer. Okay, for the appropriation for the operation of the office on sub 1. None? On limited gaming fund, no objection. On support for child in custody, for residential treatment fund, 1.6. Senator Uggan.
Mr. Speaker, because of the budgetary flexibility that is being provided in terms of the transfer authority, isn't the residential treatment fund augmented every fiscal year? Or is it a different program that's administered out of DOA?
You know, it has always been administered from DOA. The cost has, because their contract has varied, and so there have been transfers in to cover the cost.
I guess
This is the amount that came from the governor's office.
No, I understand. And I guess even the governor's office recognizes that the transfer authority continues to be a tool to be able to augment this particular requirement, because if I'm not mistaken, the last fiscal year there was approximately $600,000, $700,000 that were transferred in to support this particular program. So just for the information of the body. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, thank you. Okay, residential treatment fund. Government claims fund. Oh, wait. No, we haven't gotten to OTA yet. Government claims fund, 5. 6, single audit report. Madam Vice Speaker.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to inquire why this keeps going up every year. Seems significant. A $20,000 increase this year?
That unfortunately is the cost of the audit, and that's what's been negotiated.
These are competitively solicited?
Yes, by the OPA, but paid for by administration.
Did we pay more than 401 last year? Or this current year?
Just a sec, we'll check.
Because we only appropriated 401.
We're trying to find, but
Is the single audit report on the TAF new? Because that's also $20,000. Is that something
no,
new?
the
No?
TAF is separate.
And that's always been 20? I don't see it here. Okay.
They're separated.
Oh, I see, okay. That remains the same. I would move, Mr. Speaker, that we leave the same amount, or that we change 420 to 401, what was appropriated in 2017. Unless we paid more, I'm trying to figure out how that could happen.
There may be some additional amounts that may be required, but I suppose they would cover it, the 19,000. If you want to reduce it, where are you moving it to? Where are you going to move it to, or are you just going to save it?
Yeah, I don't know yet, Mr. Speaker. Or, I mean, can I do it later?
No, if you reduce it now, just keep a running tally of where you're taking it from, and if you're going to give it to somebody, I imagine if we're taking it from somewhere, we're going to give it to someone else. Okay?
Thank you. Should we, I don't want to reduce it if we find out that they've paid more in this fiscal year, but should we wait or just continue?
Okay,
I guess I would just move that we put an amount here that is the same as what was paid this year.
okay. Any objection?
Just to clarify what the amount is, Mr.
401.
Chair. Okay.
Last year we provided 401. This year we are proposing 420. The motion from the Vice Speaker is to reduce it to the 401. Any objection?
So, Mr. Speaker, just to clarify, that is going to free up $19,000
That
to be
I
placed
believe
someplace
is, yeah,
else?
That's
So, does the mover of the amendment have a location that this remaining 19,000 is going to go? Because if I have a recommendation. But I don't want to grab it unless she has a plan for it already.
you have a place you want to go to?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask that this be placed in the Historic Resources Division of the Department of Parks and Rec.
Okay, so you'll mark that so that we can increase it by 19,000 in the Historic Resources Division. All right, let's approve the reduction at this point, and then as long as we're not adding and throwing off the balance, I'd much rather that we come up with a total that is less than the revenue projected. So there's no objection to the reduction. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just wanted, I don't think we got the answer on why is there, last year was this year 401, and now it's 420. There must be a reason, right? That
Costs going up for attorney's fees and accounting fees. It's not even 1%.
okay, so it's not going to,
No, I mean, it's 19,000. It's
okay, no, just, I mean, as we
Yeah.
know, everything counts, right? And as long
we're-
as there's no
we're
problem
trying
with it,
to,
so-
no, it's been reduced because there was no objection. Okay? So we've gone 6-1. Tourist Attraction Fund on 7. Single audit for Highway Fund on 8.
this amount actually went down, Mr. Speaker. The TAF audit amount remains the same, but this one went down $2,000 or $1,500?
That's the amount that they requested. I don't understand myself. We just used what they, and thanked them for it. Okay. Is there any objection to the Highway Fund single audit? All right, we're now on 9 for training. Public street light.
Mr. Speaker,
Senator Dragon?
just a question. Is this the actual cost for our public streetlights, approximately $6.5 million, which is the 4.8 plus the 1.6? Is that the estimated cost of our public streetlights?
Well, that's how much we've been giving them the last.
Yeah, and the reason why I ask is because a couple years ago, they transitioned and they changed over a majority of the lights to the LED light versions, more energy efficient, and it would last, presumably last much longer. And because of the cost reductions associated with those lights, they had realized a savings of anywhere from $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, and they said they were going to put up additional streetlights so that they can continue to utilize those funds. So that's one of the reasons why I'm asking whether that's the actual cost of the public streetlights versus whether they've completed that additional project.
The fees that we are paying, as you can see, is almost the same all the way across. It's because PUC and CCU have not gotten together to get an LED rate. You're correct that they were supposed to have been a savings, but they haven't gotten a rate to charge us what they're actually expending. And so
You're right, Mr. Speaker, they haven't adjusted the cost downward for the consumers, but there was a realized savings amount that they were supposed to put up.
and you're correct
use
that
to
there
put up
has been a
additional streets.
savings.
Yeah.
There's been a savings to CCU. GPA CCU has had a savings, but they're still charging the government of Guam the sodium rates.
No, but that's where I question
Yeah,
why, as an autonomous agency, they will continue to charge the government of Guam unless, based on their statement a year ago or a year and a half ago, they said they were going to use these savings to put up additional lights so that in fact it's an offset and the island benefits. So that's why I'm asking whether in fact this is the true cost of the public street lights versus continuing to realize $500,000 of savings from this cost and actually not utilizing it to the direct benefit of our community, when in fact these are funds coming outside of the autonomous agency.
I will have to get back to you on that because I will get to CCU.
Well,
As I understand it, they were supposed to be putting up new lights. I'm not sure that they put up the new LED lights.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, I'll yield to the chair when the next
Oh,
oversight
you had a
hearing is
question?
conducted. Thank you very much.
Do somebody have the information?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, on the spreadsheet provided by OFB, it indicates under the public streetlights appropriation $6,500,000 because there's a $1,665,000 from the highway fund balance, but it looks like that was not put into the bill. Is that correct? Is that money available for appropriation?
It's appropriated from the fund balance, unappropriated fund balance of the Guam Highway Fund to DOA to pay the power bill.
Where in the, Oh, I see. That's the second part. Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Got it. So there's a total of 6 million. All right. So do you think it's premature to appropriate the savings that CCU should be realizing?
I would be willing to put a bookmark here if someone can get to CCU and find out. Okay? Senator Eda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it is true that when GPA was installing LED lights and whatnot, these are more efficient street lights, and of course they're a lot less expensive to operate. But the fact remains is that we don't have enough street lights out there. People in the community are always asking for more street lights, and GPA's plan has always been basically to utilize those savings to put up more street lights, or in fact to utilize those savings to make the investment to change out the old street lights. So I don't think that there's really any savings to speak of to divert. And so I would just suggest that any ideas about reducing the amount for public street lights to be used for something else be dismissed. Thank you.
Just a clarification, point of personal privilege, Mr. Speaker. If the statement was in reference to some of my inquiry, it was whether in fact the realized cost reduction, which the previous speaker just alluded to as a result of installing the LED lights, if those cost reduction savings were being utilized to either put up additional street lights or for the public street lights installation. So if the comments were directed towards my inquiry, the inquiry was never to take the money away, but to ensure that they're all being utilized for the public benefit.
No, your inquiry, it's not. Your inquiry was good because it pointed out the fact that the Schedule F we're looking under Guam Power Authority, and they have a schedule, but in spite of the fact that LED has been around for some time, they still do not and have not implemented through PUC an LED charge, which hopefully would be less than the high pressure sodium and the other ancient things like me on there. There's no new millennial rates with the LEDs. But if someone can find out, I'll still bookmark it. There's not going to be a savings, but I think they're just pocketing it now. Okay, 11.
Mr. Chair, I have a question for number.
Please. Oh no, we're still on 10.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were.
Oh
on
no,
11.
go ahead. If there's 11, Office of Technology.
Office of Technology. I was wondering, it seems like we're making it a separate allocation, which I'm thinking that it would be a separate agency. It seems that this is what the direction of the budget is going. Was there any appropriation in the past specifically for Office of Technology? Because I don't see it listed on our chart.
They're
Yes.
lumped into the operations.
They're lumped into the operations? So we don't really know how much they've been receiving previously?
3.8. But I think Senator Morrison wanted to address that also.
Yes. Well, I just have a concern that if we are going to make it an agency, it needs to be very clear that they're going to be their own operating agency under DOA or separate of that, if we're doing this separate appropriation. So maybe
It's
Senator
It's
Morrison.
part of the full appropriation to DOA,
Yeah.
and we're suggesting that they at least allocate up to this amount for
Right.
that agency, so that it's not left out. I'm not sure if there's going to be a move to increase that amount.
Right, but it's not an agency.
No,
And we're
Division.
treating it in appropriation as it's an agency,
a division.
a division, okay. Same, but not the same.
Okay. Let me get Senator Morrison, because he wanted in on this one first, and then I come back to you guys. Senator Morrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Office of Technology was established by Public Law 32-10, as you recall, and it was placed to be an integral part of the Department of Administration. So it was basically outlined in the law that within 6 months they will come back and provide a roadmap of how they would like to proceed to the modernization of their organizational structure, and I believe they've provided that. Yes, the intent is to in the future. That's why in one of the public hearings we were at, seeking to see how soon that we'd be able to give it potentially its own autonomy, or where the office would be best fit in possibly another agency. But when we first created the Office of Technology, we felt it was necessary, because of limited resources, to establish the office within the Department of Administration. It's always been in the past, since we created the office, to allocate the resources directly, and this is the first time I'm seeing that Department of Administration will be given the flexibility to determine those resources. But I'm concerned that knowing that they've developed a roadmap to ensure that these offices or the divisions built in the office are supported in the future, I'm concerned that if we provide that authority for DOA to control the allocation, then I think we're going backwards in where we want to see this office go. So I did proffer the amendment, Mr. Chair, earlier, to change it to its original language from may to shall, and hoping that we can allow. I have amendments in coming in possibly in the throughout the budget, Mr. Chair, to address potentially the roadmap for the Office of Technology. So I hope my colleagues can support keeping that language in, or amending that language from may to shall, as it's always been required for a DOA to allocate these resources.
Mr. Chair, I think that it's clear that in the past it was the Chief Information Office, and then it moved to Office of Technology under Department of Administration. My only concern is that we're doing an appropriation for a branch out of DOA as if it's its own agency. I understand that Office of Technology does need the funding sources to really do a plan that architecture design that they have planned for the government. However, there is no roadmap for there's no roadmap that I've seen for them to be an independent agency. So while we are still appropriating as if they were an independent agency, then I'd like to hope that when we reach other areas within this bill, that we can mirror this approach for other areas as well, where they're not giving the proper resources and operation funding to really be an effective part of the agency.
Point of information, Mr. Chair, there is a roadmap. I think your office participated several months ago with most of the line agencies, and the Chief Technology Officer presented that to many of the agencies, including your office. I believe you have a copy.
Okay, I just clearly remember the architecture and the reasoning for the appropriation. I don't remember a specific staffing pattern for this allocation, but I don't contest it. I just hope that we consider this also as we move further down the line into the bill, that we can appropriate in similar form.
That's the will of the body. The motion that is currently on the floor is Senator Morrison's request that on line 3, that the may be changed to shall. Okay, and there's an objection by Senator Nelson. No objection. Oh, okay. Okay. Did you wish to speak on it?
Yes.
Please.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I just want to clarify because on the spreadsheet, the Office of Technology is not listed as having received an appropriation separately last year. And this $4 million is coming out of, it's just an allocation out of the overall appropriation to DOA, which has been the same for the last 4 years. So does this, I just want to figure out,
No,
I
the
guess,
request for a separate allocation was actually made 2 years ago by Senator Morrison, and we have had it in the last 2 budgets.
right, but
Yeah, it's within DOA, but specifically allotting for it.
But in the last 4 years, DOA's budget has remained the same. So when the new Office of Technology came in, it was taking now $4 million from GSA's original.
And I can't remember what the name of the office was before. The data processing division was within DOA. And then there was that move to try to give birth to a new agency. We didn't midwife it correctly, and so it's still halfway there, and it hasn't been fully formed. But Senator Morrison, in his efforts to try to protect that agency, has in the last, in my recollection, at least 2 budget cycles, asked for a specific set aside or an allocation to make sure that that in the allocation that's going to be drawn up by October the 31st, that the Department of Administration does not completely ignore.
I understand the allocation, Mr. Speaker. My question is, so does this number represent the amount that was in the data processing unit? Is this for personnel, or is this for other projects of the Office of Technology? Because it's taking away from DOA's budget, like what the amount that they had in 2015, 2016, and is it the same that was allocated for data processing back then?
I don't believe that it was that much was allocated for data processing 6 or 8 years ago, but the Office of Technology has been trying to establish itself, and unless we give it lifeblood, it will shrivel and die. And Senator Morrison has been trying to protect it.
I understand, Mr. Speaker. I have no objection to the allocation, but I'm concerned about the amount, because if it was not the same amount that DOA was allocating towards that type of activity before, this may impact all of DOA's other activities, including procurement, which we receive complaints on a daily basis as to procurement
On the screen is a copy of the current year's
2017.
budget, yes. And again, the allocation
The
was separate.
allocation's there, right. Do you know what this is for, Mr. Speaker? Is this for personnel?
It's for everything.
Do we know
The
how much
entire
of this is for
operation.
personnel for the Office of Technology?
I don't remember when we had them, hold on, maybe we can pull it up, but
Because she was, last year, does it say may or shall? Shall?
yes. Senator Morrison has been trying very hard to make sure that it's protected.
Mr. Chair, not only protected, Mr. Chair, we've been working hard, and I appreciate your efforts too, and ensuring that the roadmap was put before many members of the body. If they don't have a copy of what the Office of Technology's proposed plans are to address modernizing their staffing, I think we're very close to maybe in fiscal year 29 to at least begin the process of starting to staff this office more according to what it should look like. We've been waiting for this roadmap, but they've just been budgeting to keep the existing infrastructure or the existing organizational structure. But my understanding, they've also been working closely with HR at DOA with the descriptions of many of these new divisions that are being created, new staffing that are being created to stand up the office more, I guess, accordingly to what a Office of Technology should look like. So that roadmap was presented before us, or before many of our agencies and some members of this body, and I think if we allow that flexibility for DOA to control the allocation, I think will compromise the efforts of the Office of Technology going forward.
For some reason, the computers aren't able to get it up on the screen, and you don't have yours today. But in the committee report, it shows that almost $2.5 million is actually for contracts. Remember when they did the presentation to us? They're having to pay for all the licenses, for all of the programs that we have, all of the, I don't know computer that well, but I remember that they were paying for licenses. I think, Senator Nelson, you asked them questions about the licenses that they had. And of that 3.8, only 400,000 is for personnel. The major 2.2 or more than that is actually for contracts and for equipment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So any objection to Senator Snagestein, and then Lee, then Ada?
Mr. Chairman, you know, I support the Office of Technology of what their intent is. But my concern is, number one, under the Department of Administration, as I inquired about what's going on at the Office of Technology, their biggest hardship is exactly what Senator Chalai brought up, the issues of GSA. They also have an impact on personnel and being reclassified, people getting their increment. There's about almost $1 million worth of what's due to the employees for reclass and increments. And if they're not allowed the flexibility of the up to the sum, there won't be any money to pay the employees that are there, their increments and the reclass. And if there's any problems anywhere else, the shall will go to technology. And if there's in fact a true roadmap, I like to see it on its way to success. Not just the excuse of we got one, but there's nothing going anywhere. Because right now, revenue and tax pays their own. And they're doing their own with DMR and everybody. And if Office Technology is really true, that should capture every agency, and everybody should chip into that same pot. Thank you, sir.
I only wish that were true because, and that's the reason that we're trying to get it. I mean, I do not believe that at your building, your old building at Rev and Tax, the computer for DOA cannot talk to the computer for DRT because there's some firewall or some design not to allow it for fear of being hacked in or something. Again, I'm exposing my ignorance on computers, but I distinctly remember all the public hearings that we've had in the past of that. But the thing is that last year and this year, we're just trying to protect what little the Office of Technology has had, and to cover the contracts that they've undertaken for the licenses for everybody else in government. But again, I leave it to those of you. I don't understand how it's done, but I do know that it is being done, and I'd like to protect it. But if it's a desired to have the Director of Administration be able to take or provide less for them, that it's bodies. Senator Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to reiterate the point that you had made earlier that a bulk of this allotment, or the $3.9 million that we're discussing now about the Office of Technology, goes towards software, goes towards licensing, and other IT services, in addition to a few FTEs that are under the Office of Technology. And they're really there to provide high quality, reliable service across our government agencies, and their mission is to deploy those resources and to prevent potential costly mistakes across the government for people engaging in new technology and trying to beef up basically what we have. So we want to build, we want to maintain the technological infrastructure that we have in place today, but we also want to think a little bit ahead towards the future and attempt to promote economic growth and use these resources to provide effective services for our people. People are always wanting to go online with certain things, be able to pay their bills online, and a lot of that requires some backroom assistance with folks who are really intimate with IT. So I think that's really important that we provide them the resources that they need, and especially since this language was already in the previous year's bill, that it was a shall instead of a may. I stand in support of Senator Morrison's amendment and in support of the Office of Technology and the great work that I think they're doing for our people. Thank you.
Thank you. And Senator Atta?
I certainly support the amendment to change the word from may to shall, but I'm a little concerned about the first two words on line 1 of up to the sum of $3 million. So unless we put a minimum, you know, they could allocate $1 and they've satisfied this. So I would like to make an amendment to the amendment and strike the words up to and simply say that the sum of $3,900,000, whatever, that amount shall be allocated.
On the ADA amendment, Senator Uggan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I sit in opposition of the proposed amendment, and you know what's kind of interesting is the expectations, and we heard from the Department of Administration Director repeatedly every time that we request information or financial reports. Also, in addition to that, the processing of all personnel documentation, the procurement process, a lot of these responsibilities are at the forefront of making sure that this government runs efficiently. And to me, the concern I have is to specifically set aside from DOA's budget a significant amount of $3.9 million for the Office of Technology, rather than allowing the flexibility for the Director of Administration to dictate how much is allocated to the Office of Technology. Because, Mr. Speaker, it's not only a DOA subsection or division. It is a policy by this island community by virtue of the law, and it is really a priority of the administration if, in fact, they want to identify funds. So in this case, trying to tighten the amount and making sure that it's restrictive, I would have to stand in opposition of that to ensure that DOA continues to have at least as much flexibility to run their operations when it deals with personnel issues, when it deals with cutting of checks, when it deals with processing of tax refunds, when it deals with procurement. These are all basic and critical services that they continue to provide the government of Guam as well as this island community. So I would have to oppose the proposed amendment. Thank you very much.
You oppose the amendment? The amendment that's on the floor currently is Senator Addis to remove the up to.
The amendment to the amendment.
Okay, and just so that I don't get called out on misrepresenting, I've been corrected. Of the 3.9, 1.2 is personnel, 2.2 is contractual services. They have their rent, their power, water, and their power, and their power is substantial. It runs something like $10,000 a month. I mean, they're running all these computers, so they have a very high power. But it's 1.2 for personnel, 2.2 for contractual services and licenses, and that's 3.6 out of the 3.9. Okay, that's. On the amendment, to the amendment, Senator Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of the amendment. I think the problem, Mr. Chair, again, is I think we've built this office into the Department of Administration. I think that's where the problem lies. And I think, you know, to allow another entity to dictate how this office should run is really, you know, sending the message of how we want to advance our government using IT services. You know, I think we're forgetting what day and age we live in. But I think, you know, we're sending the wrong message that, you know, that this office is really, if you look at the roadmap going forward, Mr. Chair, I think you can see that it's clearly underfunded if we were to really stand this office up the way it should be, given what it needs from cybersecurity, GPS, data processing, website development. The list goes on. We're not there yet. This office is underfunded based on what we're looking for with the roadmap. So I appreciate your efforts to help protect this office, understanding that we are probably 10, 15 years behind the curve in regards to IT in our government. And I believe we should continue to build this office going forward. So I rise to support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other senator on the amendment to remove up to? Is there an objection to the amendment? Senator Uggan. All those in favor of, Senator Nelson, did you wish to speak or? Okay. Since there is an objection, all those in favor of the amendment to remove up to indicate by raising your hand. No, just 4 fails on the amendment. On the original amendment, there being an objection, all those in favor of the original amendment, and there is an objection by Senator Uggan, On the original amendment, all those in favor of removing the may and replacing it with shall, please indicate by raising your hand. Passes. Thank you. Guam Autism Center funding.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the genesis of the Guam Autism Center is basically embedded in, I believe, 33227, public law. And again, the intention and the effort is definitely worthy. However, in this budget bill, we're providing funding pursuant, and the appropriation shall be used as initial investment by the government of Guam to assist the Guam Autism Center to provide services at a temporary location prior to the one-stop DISID Center being built. I guess the question I have is, has the RFP issued, first of all, from GITA for the Autism Center, or what's going to be constructed as a DISID Center, in which then the autism operation will operate out of?
As I understand it, no.
And again, under the law, it says that, you know, once that DISID Business Center is built, the space shall be leased at a negotiated rate not to exceed fair market value to a not-for-profit 501c3 organized registered in Guam. The question then is, has there been? I mean, it says for the initial investment, according to this budget bill, to assist the Guam Autism Center. If there is no Guam Autism Center, then what are we appropriating for? To assist the Guam Autism Center to provide services. And so is there an organization to receive this from DOA?
Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I want to thank you for including a provision like this in the budget. And I believe this provision comes from a bill that was introduced that had a public hearing, which was Bill 96-34. And so if anything, maybe this could also answer the Senator Spaldon's question of where this money would go. So Bill 96 is very clear, is that the $150,000 would be appropriated to DOA, and it will be used to fund the Hunter Speaks organization. It's a nonprofit organization that was established to provide autism spectrum disorder services to our community. And so if I may at this time, Mr. Speaker, make an amendment to this section, and it'll be on line 12. After the Guam Autism Center, will include by Hunter Speaks, a nonprofit organization. And so it becomes clear on where this funding would be used for.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, on what line?
I may have a different, because I noticed when you were giving
It's
lines.
on line 16 and
Okay, so this is different from
line 19. He's wanting to make it specific to Hunter
Speaks, nonprofit organization. It's also consistent with the bill that had a hearing, Bill 96.
And the reason why we had written it without is that we try not to make specific appropriations to.
Correct, and that's why. And again, I don't want to diminish the importance of the organization that was formed and what their mission is. However, it would seem to me that now, before the space is even available, at the District Business Center, we're giving it to an organization, first of all, that has been formed, but the bill that the good senator has still not been voted upon. So it's almost an anticipation of a favorable outcome on that bill, which is uncertain at this time. Not that I don't think anybody will object, but again, it's still out there. It's not set in law. There's nothing out there. On top of it, it would seem to me by going down this road, we give them an advantage over any other 501c3 organization that might form, who may be interested in providing the same services once the District Business Center is formed. And so there would seem to be, let me just put it, it seems to me that we should be at least a little cautious in that approach, because then we're almost implying that this is going to be the organization that's going to take the space that will be available once the District Business Center is formed, and they have the proprietary position because the government supports it. And so I caution us in those terms.
Thank you. And Senator Esteves on the Rodriguez amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regard to what I understand about this organization and the intent, as I inquired about the intent of the use of the funding, is that it's the intent of the nonprofit to become self-sustaining. There's no intention for this to be a sustaining appropriation, a continuing appropriation year after year. Now, as it reads right now in item 12, is that yes, it does provide for a temporary location, because regardless of the hard facility, it's the intent of the organization to become self-sufficient. And I think regardless of the location, the imperative and the mission statement of this organization to do it. Now, with regards to competition or other nonprofits, wanting to compete for this, at the end of the day, they're a nonprofit organization. They exist in an entirely different realm. Competition for who wants what, I think really goes out the window, and it just becomes which organization is available and moving to provide this much needed service to the community. And in the grand scheme of things, it's really at a fraction of the cost. So with that, I would support the amendment to identify the nonprofit organization, and I support this provision within the law, within the budget. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on the Rodriguez amendment? Senator, Madam Vice Speaker.
It is a little confusing, Mr. Speaker, because the Public Law 33-227 that's cited in this section provided that the space in the District Business Center shall be leased at a negotiated rate to a nonprofit. And it says the selection of a lessee shall be through a request for proposal issued by GITA. And I guess I just want to be clear whether we're providing with 150 office space or we're providing services, because it says in the second paragraph to provide services at a temporary location. And if it's for DOA, and that's, I guess I was wondering earlier, but then when I looked up the law, if it's for DOA to get office space, I guess I could see that. But if it's to provide services, that's not consistent with the 33-227.
Just a point of information, Mr. Chair. This investment would be for services, as was testified during the public hearing. It's not to be used for rental space. They've made that very clear. They have programs that are already running that are that are having GDOE teachers go through this certification to be BCBAs, which is Board Certified Behavior Analyst. And so these are for the services. And I think I was hoping that by the amendment of striking pursuant to provisions of Public Law 33-227, that it makes it clear, because they're right, Public Law 33-227 has a process in getting that space. But this is just to help them get the services going, because they are ready. They're a 5013C nonprofit. Things are moving for them. They just need this investment to be able to take it to that next level. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the Rodriguez amendment, any other senator wish to be heard?
Could you please repeat the amendment, Mr. Speaker?
The amendment would be, so we'll read, Guam Autism Center funding. The sum of $150,000 is appropriated from the general fund to DOA for the implementation and establishment of the Guam Autism Center by Hunter Speaks, nonprofit organization, period. And then goes on with the next paragraph.
So he's striking pursuant to provisions of Public Law 2033-227 in fiscal year 2018. Okay, so that's the amendment there, and that's the current amendment that is being proffered. Senator Nelson on the amendment.
Mr. Chair, is the Hunter Speaks organization the only organization that assists those with autism?
I cannot.
Are they the
I
only
cannot say
nonprofit?
that it is. They were the ones that came and testified at the public hearing.
Yes, I was there. I remember that too. But I'm just wondering if they're the only nonprofit organization that provides services for autism.
Yes, at this point, Mr. Chairman, they're the only ones that provide this type of service that they have testified on. And I can assure you there's no other organization, at least here now, that is running to, or at this level of what they have established already.
And then just to clarify, I believe in the public hearing, they were asked for some specifics on how they would use the $150,000. And they said that they would use it to bring in personnel to start catering or providing services to the people before the center was built. And so I just want to clarify with the chair of the committee if they in fact submitted a plan for the allocation of this $150K.
If memory serves me right, at the hearing they said what they wanted to do with this money was to continue to provide scholarship/grants to social workers and mental health professionals who wanted, and teachers who wanted the additional education and training to become board certified behavioral analysts. That's what they wanted to do. I think if I remember correctly, they had assisted 3 or 4, and they wanted, there is a need for, unfortunately, multiples of that amount of behavioral analysts, not only at the center, but within the school system. And that's what they want to try to, that's their intent. Because otherwise, as I recall from the testimony and from personal information, people are moving off island to get services for their children, and others are doing it, flying off island every once in a while to have services for their kids. And this is an attempt to get board certified behavioral analysts locally so that the services that are provided can be done, can be done here on island, as opposed to having to emigrate from the island.
And is there an agreement that when they graduate from the required services courses, that they become board certified autism, I don't know what you would call it, but the primary caregivers or the assessors for autism, would they be required to stay on Guam for an X amount of years? They don't just fly off with the certification after they've been given the scholarship amounts.
That was not discussed at the hearing. I don't remember that being discussed, but I do know that most of the ones that were looking for assistance to get the certification were current teachers in the Department of Education who. Any other senator wish to be heard on the Rodriguez amendment on line 16 and 17?
Mr. Speaker, does that then become the Autism Center that is referenced in Public Law 33-227?
No, because that law has some strict procedures on how you become the Autism Center through that process. So no, I mean, I don't, this is not a default in making them the Autism Center.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask for a 1-minute recess to discuss a potential amendment.
We're in recess for Are you Go ahead. We're back on the record.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to withdraw my motion and yield to Senator Esteves for his.
Senator Esteves, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to propose an amendment. Page 17, item 12, beginning on line 15, to read. Page 78, line 15.
Okay.
And to simplify it, actually the amendment's going to start on 13, and I'll just read through the new section. Starting on line 13, page 78. 12, Guam Autism Education Funding. The sum of $150,000 is appropriated from the general fund of DOA for Hunter Speaks nonprofit organization, period. This appropriation shall be used as an initial investment by the government of Guam to provide autism services on Guam, period.
The amendment has been proffered by Senator Esteves.
Could they read that one more time, Mr. Chair?
This section will read Guam Autism Education, so supplementing Center for Education funding. And we'll read, the sum of $150,000 is appropriated from the general fund to DOA for Hunter Speaks nonprofit organization, period. This appropriation shall be used as an initial investment by the government of Guam to provide autism services on Guam, period.
Does everybody understand the amendment? The Vice Speaker is, can we type that up and get it distributed? Committee of the Whole is back in order. Senator Estevez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think everyone, all of my colleagues got a copy. So again, I'll read through it one more time. And this is line 3, page 78, to amend chapter 5, section 1G12 of the bill to read 12, Guam Autism Education Funding. The sum of $150,000 is appropriated from the general fund to DOA for Hunter Speaks nonprofit organization in fiscal year 2018. This appropriation shall be a one-time appropriation to be used as an initial investment by the government of Guam to provide for autism services on Guam. There is a typo here. There's an additional 2 right before assist. So there's only supposed to be 1. So if you can strike out the 2 right after Guam, and it'll continue.
On the Estevez amendment, any senator wish to be heard? Senator San Augustine.
Mr. Speaker, I'm in support of the amendment, except for the verbiage there at one-time appropriation. I don't think that needs to be said if it's only earmarked for 2018 only. And autism is not going to go away. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that's understood. Because I provide, out of the 4 motorcycle clubs I belong to, we provide support to all the autism events that they have. So I'm just concerned that the one-time appropriation part, I'm not comfortable with just that verbiage. I support the appropriation, totally. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to address that, Mr. Chair. That verbiage was added in order to gain support for the amendment. So that was one of the conditions to providing support, is that we add the verbiage there as a one-time appropriation, even though I do understand that this budget only applies for fiscal year 2018. So I do ask for your continued support for the amendment.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Espaldon and Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this is one of those heart-wrenching things that I really don't want to have to argue about, because we know the difficulty that the families who have family members who are autistic, the hardships they go through, and any efforts to help them is a noble cause. However, first of all, I need to make sure that I correct a statement that was made by a previous speaker when the question was asked whether Hunter Speak is the only organization that addresses, the only registered nonprofit organization that addresses autism on this island, which is actually a newly registered nonprofit organization. There is at least 2 that I know of, just in this brief recess that we've had, that I've been called in on. One of them is Parents Empowering Parents Disabilities nonprofit group, who works with autistic families as well. And then there's one called the ACT, the Autism Community Together group, who's been in existence for a very long time, working with the families who have children, in fact comprised mainly of the families who have family members who are autistic. And they've been together for quite a while now also. So just to clarify, the Hunter Speak group, as noble as their mission is, they are not the only ones. So for us to show favor to one organization and over other organizations who basically are operating the same realm, right, I think would be unfair. Second of all, what you had presented to us in terms of what was said at the public hearing of the mission, or what the organization Hunters Speak, is that the name of the organization? Hunters Speak organization, that what they were looking forward to was to provide scholarships and grants to social workers and teachers and whatnot to help train them. However, this amendment doesn't say that. It says to provide for autism services on Guam. And so those are two different categories of efforts that perhaps don't align. One is to give scholarships and grants. The other one is to provide services. And maybe we could derive that the scholarships and grants will eventually lead to the services, but without further knowledge to even a question that one of our colleagues asked, whether in the scholarships or grants, whether those who are granted it will be required to provide services on this island or even for this organization going forward is not clear. So, again, I reserve any judgment on this amendment of how I'm going to vote on it. But again, I think there is an inequity built in, right? Because there are other organizations out there that deal with the autistic community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Espaldon. Senator Rodriguez, any other senator wish to be heard on the amendment? Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I didn't want to interrupt the retiring speaker to point out a point of information, but they are, and if I wasn't clear earlier, when I stated that Hunter Speak was the only organization that is offering and is working on services that would provide direct treatment services to our kids affected by autism. Absolutely, I've worked with the other organizations, and a lot of them are really support groups who are providing services to families affected by autism. And so the retiring speaker is correct, is that there are other organizations here. But I would like to restate that the Hunter Speaks organization is the only organization, at least that I know of. I may be corrected, but the only organization I know of here locally that is moving in the direction of providing direct services, treatment services to our kids and families on Guam. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I want to rise in support of the amendment, Senator Esteves' amendment. I think it makes it clear what this appropriation is for. And I also support the language where it is a one-time appropriation. I recognize a good colleague from GIGO's statement that this is something that needs to be funded annually. But as we heard in the public hearing, this organization is determined to be self-sustaining. This body, previous legislature, has passed a measure that would now require health insurance to cover autistic services. And so with those mechanisms that we put in place, we were hoping that this center, whether it be them and if there's any other center in the future, would be self-sustaining, and the government won't have to provide any direct appropriations for this. So again, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? Madam Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just would like for, as the government of Guam, when we, see fit to pass a policy to provide services or treatment services in particular, I'm all for that. I think particularly the Hunter Speaks and other organizations that were present at the public hearings when we passed the bill to allow them space at the district center that was going to be built, and on the public hearing on this bill, and when they passed the bill to allow insurance to cover autistic individuals' services. I guess I just wanted to be sure that as the government of Guam, we establish a policy. I would like to see, clear policy, as we have done for other services. And I'm just going to read the language from Guam Behavioral Health. When we wanted to establish services for the community, we established it by using language such as appropriated to Guam Behavioral Health to fund programs contracted out to non-governmental organizations for drug and alcohol detoxification, rehabilitation, and prevention services. And so for this, I would just like to be more specific, especially because we've heard first that it was interpreted that the services that would be provided would be scholarships, but now it seems more like this is geared towards treatment services, and if that's the case, I would like to be specific, Mr. Speaker, and offer an amendment to the bill that says on the second sentence, this appropriation shall be a one-time appropriation to be used, and then to delete from there all the way to Guam, and to add in the word treatment after the word autism, so that the new sentence will read, this appropriation shall be used, shall be a one-time appropriation to be used to provide for autism treatment services on Guam. I'm hoping treatment is direct enough. Unless we're trying to provide scholarships, Mr. Speaker, then I would ask that we give this money directly over to UOG to provide scholarships for those type of degrees or that type of certification or training or additional training, since they're already set up to do that. This money is going to be going to DOA for treatment services at this point. I mean, I would support this amendment if we could further amend it to add in the word treatment after autism treatment services, and just to take out this investment language.
On the Chulahi amendment, I'll recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I don't necessarily have an objection to that amendment, which would be to add, I believe that, or it'll be understood that this money would be used for treatment services. I want to caution us not to be too prescriptive in how we do things. When the retiring speaker talked about how we have the Guam Behavioral Health Center who is there to provide treatment services, and we have this continuing appropriations to different organizations that provide substance abuse and other services. I want to make it very clear with this here, Mr. Speaker, we have a organization that is looking at being able to provide a very needed service on island, and the hope and the desire is to do it on their own, to be self-sustaining. That's why we've done other efforts to help them through that pathway. So by including, and I don't know if she can just repeat her amendment, Mr. Speaker, so I can just understand it better.
Sure, it was just to, in the second sentence, to delete after the word used, to delete the words as an initial investment by the government of Guam, and to add the word treatment after autism. So the sentence will read, this appropriation shall be a one-time appropriation to be used to provide for autism treatment services on Guam.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, with that being said, I have no objection. Thank you.
Senator Steves and Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do object to the amendment. I think it's good to call it what it is, which is an investment by this government, really to an organization that intends to be self-sufficient, that intends to provide services that frankly this government is not providing. And in the future will be a cost saving to us because we won't have this burden on both us and the taxpayers. And you got to understand, this is community driven. Now, as far as adding treatment in there, I think the retiring speaker had echoed the sentiment. And having a medical background, we have to be very, very careful in the words that we use. Treatment, services, one word could make this money be entirely useless for what the intended purpose is. In the medical field, especially when you start getting into the rungs of behavioral health and actual medical treatment, you start to get things become convoluted. So I think that general statement of services is very important because it includes treatment. But now when you start dealing with other services, the terminology becomes very, very tricky in this realm. Whereas treatment or services might not be considered treatment. Now, again, Mr. Chair, I object to the language. I think it's going to affect the intent of what the funding is supposed to do by trying to be too prescriptive of the language. I think we should leave it as is.
Thank you, Senator Espaldon. You're recognized.
Yes, this is on the amendment to the amendment. And I appreciate what the move of this amendment to the amendment is trying to do to perhaps zero in, because again, it was offered to us by you, Mr. Chairman, that at the public hearing, what they were going to use this, what Hunter Speak organization was going to use this money for was for scholarships and grants, not necessarily for treatment. And we could take that next step and say, well, those scholarships and grants will provide for treatment once they do get certified and understood. However, at $150,000, where are we going? But I will speak to the general amendment once we get through this amendment to the amendment, because it, and I'll state my reasons for that. But this one, is treatment the right word? What kind of treatment are we talking about, right? And I don't know, right? And whether that's even the proper word to use. What is the treatment for autistic individuals? I'm not really sure. So, again, I have reservations on this as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Espaldon. Any other senator wish to speak on the Terlahi amendment? On the Terlahi amendment? Do you wish to close?
Mr. Speaker, yes, I'm just asking, I'm trying to see how they describe the services that are provided by insurance, and maybe we could mirror that description. But I just think to say I mean, I don't know, it's just, I think we could be, if there's another word besides treatment that they would like to use, I'm open to that, but I haven't heard any other description except for scholarships. And I guess I wanted to be clear whether we're doing scholarships or we're doing treatment.
No, I really should clarify. It wasn't to pay, that I think the question that was asked of them was it going to pay themselves for their service, and they made it very clear that the money was not going to them. It was going to these young people that wanted to learn how, or learn and be certified to provide the services. And so please don't have my recollection of what was testified to be the guiding light in this discussion. I remember distinctly, because of the fact that I thought that was a great idea, but it, as Senator Espaldon has put it, it's probably the training so you can do the services. But I was just impressed with the certification to provide the services, and so it may be all of the above, or.
Mr. Chair, because I believe we all have a heartfelt sincerity to try to help the autism community on this island. But because there are some questions in terms of how this money, because we're setting policy by doing this, perhaps we can bookmark this and then we can perhaps talk to some of the experts in the field that we know of and see if there's a way to really bring this all together that would really benefit the efforts, the ongoing efforts that have been going on for years to include the Hunter Speak organization of how this money can best be spent.
Thank you very much, yes. We'll bookmark it and we'll come back.
Mr. Chair, I object. I think right now we have 2 motions for 2 amendments on the floor that need to be resolved before we bookmark this.
Not necessarily, Mr. Chairman, because before we can vote on these amendments, we need to educate ourselves a little bit more to be able to make, because this is totally new. This is not something that historically has been in the budget. On top of it, there were several words that were used, right, in the arguments for this measure. One was self-sustaining. As I mentioned before, there is an organization that's been in existence for years now without any assistance from the government, right, who have been self-sustaining, but if they knew that they could access governmental funds, I'm sure they would have been here, but they've been self-sustaining already. On top of it, there was another mention of a phrase, community-driven. The Parents Empowering Parents Disabilities nonprofit group, as well as the Autistic Community Together group, is a basic community-driven effort. So until we can get perhaps a better understanding of really the whole autistic need, and so that we can place this money towards, really addressing the bigger picture, then I think it's wise, before we take the vote, to educate ourselves a little bit more.
The chair is going to bookmark this, and we'll get some resolution, and we'll move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The next section is Department of Revenue and Taxation.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Quick question, point of order, just for clarification. So the language is as stands as your bill, right? Because the amendment hasn't been resolved yet?
Yes, well, yes, there hasn't been anything. So let's just leave it and we'll come back to it.
Mr. Chair, and also if the chair would agree, we can have representative from Hunter Speaks come and explain.
No, we'll not work this out or the whole thing gets struck, okay? Let's work this out. It's 150 and we stopped longer than we did for the past public health, for Christ's sake. Please, we bookmarked it. We're moving on to revenue and taxation.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, on DOA, there was an amendment that was circulated, provided to all of our colleagues, inclusive of yourself, regarding allocation for drug testing.
It'll be in news.
And Mr. Speaker, I was looking initially at introducing this amendment in Chapter 11, but I believe it's more appropriate if, in fact, it's incorporated into the Department of Administration section. So, Mr. Speaker, with your indulgence and the indulgence of our colleagues, I'd like to move for the addition of this particular provision, which would read Section 13, allocation for drug testing. The sum of up to $40,000 may be allocated from the general and special fund appropriations to departments and agencies in Part 4 of Chapter 2, Parts 2, 3, and 4 of Chapter 3, and Chapter 5 to the Department of Administration for the purpose of administering drug tests for the respective departments and agencies from which such funds are allocated. The Director of the Bureau of Budget Management, in collaboration with the Director of Administration, shall determine from which departments and agencies and from which funds such allocation shall be made. Mr. Speaker, I believe that we don't need to turn the clock back too far beyond the last 4 weeks, where in fact one particular agency conducted random tests, of which 7+ individuals were identified. And this would be a mechanism, no additional funds identified other than within the respective entities and departments, and recognizing that the Department of Administration is a central clearinghouse for the conduct of drug testing activities. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask our colleagues and for your consideration. Thank you very much.
There's been an amendment proffered, a new section 13. Anyone wish to be heard on this amendment? Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this amendment. We seem to have an ongoing challenge with drug-related issues in our island, so this is a good step forward to ensuring that we have a truly drug-free workplace, and I support this amendment.
Any other senator wish to be heard on this amendment? Any objection to this amendment being added? Senator.
Is it implied, or it says BBMR shall determine from which departments and which funds such allocation shall be made, but these tests are not made without direction of the directors of every department. Is that right? Or are we covering now hiring and?
No, that's absolutely correct, Madam Vice Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I may respond, that's absolutely correct. Already the program is pre-existing, and what I'd like to do and what this amendment proposes is recognizing the situation that exists at least in one government agency, and hopefully it does not exist in others, but then recognizing that up to this amount would be allocated specifically for the drug testing based on BBMR's collaboration with DOA in identifying the funds. But Vice Speaker, Madam Vice Speaker, you're right. The directors of the respective agencies are always part of the equation.
Senator Atta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe if the mover of the amendment can clarify, what would be the basis of BBMR and DOA's determination as to which departments should be allocated these amounts? What would be their basis for doing that?
Thank you very much, Senator. Excellent question. If I may, Mr. Speaker, respond. It would be based on the number of random drug tests conducted for that particular agency. So it's a cost-associated program where, in fact, the directors work in collaboration in terms of identifying the funding for the actual administration of the drug tests, and then they coordinate and collaborate with DOA and BBMR as part of the equation to be able to identify where the resources or the source of repayment for the administration of the drug tests would originate from.
So, Vice Speaker, do you still can have Senator Atta? Is there clarification? Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard? Any objection to this amendment? Objection. All those in favor of this appropriation? This allocation from the various agencies for drug testing. Any objection? All those in favor, raise your hand. Motion passes. Anything further besides 12 on this chapter? Can we move on to revenue tax? Revenue and taxation. Pardon?
Move to accept the whole section H.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to.
Okay, let's go through it item by item.
Mr. Chair, I just have several questions.
Okay, we'll go section by section.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't want to close. I would like to keep everything open for now. If we could bookmark, it would be my request to bookmark this page. But I do have several questions that is in reference to federal matching grants in aid section 3.
And can we get more specific with it so we can work through it? Can we go section by section and you tell me which ones you're having problems with?
Yes, I just...
Okay, one on the appropriation.
Yes, I have a problem with that.
And what issues do you have?
Well, if we go down to page 80, the recruitment of revenue agents to increase revenue collections and compliance and audit tax filings, there's a sum of $1,100,000 that is allocated for fiscal year 18. And I noticed that this is a requirement for more personnel. And I'm curious because, please correct me if I'm wrong, I did some research and I did not see any public law or anything of that nature to support the additional allocation for personnel. I know GPD had a requirement for additional personnel, so I'm just wondering how this $1.1 million was allocated for additional personnel.
In order to get GPD the additional money?
No,
we're
that's
going
not
to
my
need to
question.
collect money in order to be able to pay the additional funds.
Was there a public law for this additional personnel?
No.
Okay. I looked at the staffing pattern for DRT. Let's pull this up. In fiscal year 17, they had 30 positions that were vacant. In fiscal year 16, they have 27 positions that were vacant. I'm sorry, fiscal year 17, they had 35 vacant positions. And so I'm just wondering, in the staffing pattern, all of these vacant positions have a dollar amount, which I don't know if I'm reading this wrong, and if you can correct me, this dollar amount shows that they were actually paid to personnel. So we can go with the most recent fiscal year. Computer operator 3 vacant at a grade step J1. Salary is $31,000, totaling to $42,272. Word processing secretary 2 vacant. $26,250 is the salary, totaling to $36,401. Revenue agent 3 vacant, salary of $40,762, totaling to $54,258. Revenue agent 1 vacant, salary $31,000, totaling to $42,272. Revenue officer 3 vacant, salary $33,911, totaling to $45,430. And there's 4 revenue officer 2s that are vacant, with a salary of $31,076, totaling to $42,272. So just by looking at the staffing pattern, it seems that these positions are being paid out, but there's no name to them. And when we first started to review the budget with DOA, they said that they could fill these positions within a matter of 2 weeks. And so I'm wondering why there's no name next to these vacant positions. And this goes on for previous years. But then we're all giving them an extra $1.1 million to hire more if they can't even fill their vacant positions, which has a dollar amount, which is appropriated for, which is being paid for, but there's no name. So can you please just clarify that for me? Why these positions are vacant? It looks like they're being paid, but there's no name or listing attached to them. And then yet we're giving them $1.1 million more to hire for, I don't understand where all this money's going. And even if you look at their submission for fiscal year 2018, they have 30 positions that are vacant, but they still have a dollar amount next to each position in their staffing pattern, and it looks like they've been paid out, but there's no name. So in 2018, you have the revenue agents, a total of 9, and I'm thinking that those are the people that collect our BPT and tax withholding. So you have the revenue agent 3 available, revenue agent 1, revenue officer 3, revenue officer 2, 4 positions, compliance and inspection supervisor, and revenue officer 3. It's a total of 9. That's not including the other 21 positions in their FY18 budget request. So if I'm confused in any way, am I confused?
Let me get clarification. We'll take a recess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
There's been a request to have DRT and GPD here, and GPD is like 4 pages away from here. Recess until, I know, but I'm just saying, if we're going to stop and bookmark, let's stop and bookmark and just recess until we deal with it in the morning. All right? 10, and instruct, and then they have GPD on standby for about 11 o'clock. Senator Nelson? Okay, if you're having them so that we can move through this before lunch. 10.